Hey, I'm Roland with mobilegeeks.com and .de, and what we have right here is a quick comparison of the Moto G, which is a new quad-core cheap smartphone or well-priced smartphone from Motorola that just came out, and last year's LG Nexus 4. The reason why we want to compare these is because basically in pure hardware performance or CPU performance, I think the Moto G is almost up to par to the Nexus 4, and in a couple of benchmarks it's actually faster considering raw benchmark points. But let's first check out the hardware and then let's get on to the benchmark side of things. We have a 4.5-inch screen with 720p resolution IPS panel on the Moto G and a 4.7-inch IPS panel on the Nexus 4 that also has a 720p resolution. The brightness is pretty much the same on both devices. We just checked it and measured it. It's basically just around 400 candela, which is pretty good for a smartphone that is that cheap as the Motorola, and totally fine for the Nexus 4. Fonts look all look pretty sharp, good quality, and basically they both have pretty good displays. If you look at the viewing angles, you can see that the Motorola has a point where it starts to get darker a bit earlier, but that's probably because of the higher pixel density, but it's not that much of a difference. So actually the Motorola Moto G has a bit the viewing angles are not as good as on the Nexus 4. Otherwise, great display, awesome quality, so definitely could be recommended. There's 2 gigs of RAM in the Nexus 4 and a Qualcomm APQ 8064 from last year. That's the Snapdragon 4 S4 Pro quad-core chip at 1.5 gigahertz, and it has an Adreno 320 graphics part. So that is actually a way better CPU than on the Moto G, but in pure performance it can't really keep up with the Moto G. But the main difference is graphics quality or graphics power, because the Moto G has a 1.2 gigahertz Qualcomm MSM 86626Q quad-core chip that is a new Snapdragon 400 chip. So basically it's the next generation chip compared to the S4 Pro. So it's a bit faster at a lower speed, but when it gets to the graphics part of things, the Nexus 4 is definitely still ahead. Because if you look at the benchmarks right here, this is Antutu benchmark. First, when you look at the score right here, in this benchmark, the Moto G scores a bit better than the Nexus 4 in the stock configuration. So you have 17,500 something points in Antutu 4, and the Nexus 4 gets just around 17,000. But this version right here is actually my phone running on CyanogenMod, which got installed through their new installer. And if you look at those values, it's a bit higher up. But basically, actually, the Moto G can very well keep up with devices such as Galaxy S3 and Nexus 4. But let's get to the graphics stuff that I was talking about. Because if you start GFX Bench and check out the results I got in here, it's basically tells you all about how big the difference between the two graphics parts is. Because the Adreno 305 on the Moto G only gets you just under 6 frames in the off-screen benchmark and 11 frames on screen, while the Nexus 4 gets 15 and 25 in those two benchmarks. And if you go further down, you can actually see that it's basically the same picture you get on all the other scores. So the Adreno 320 on the Nexus 4 is still way ahead, and that should actually show in games too. Otherwise, there's not that much of a big difference, but the two phones are actually in two different leagues, but that's probably should be clear right now, because this is a high-end device and this is supposed to be like a mid-end or low-end or at least well-priced phone. You get 2 gigs of RAM on the Nexus, 1 gig on the Moto G. The batteries are basically pretty much the same size because the Nexus 4 has a 2100 mAh battery while the Moto G has 2070. So this one actually lasts all day and a bit longer. So you, in average, you get around 16 hours of battery life on this. The Nexus 4 sometimes has a couple of problems keeping up with that because the old S4 Pro is a bit more power hungry compared to the newer Snapdragon 400 in the Moto G. They both have 1.3 megapixel cameras on the front, so there's not much of a difference there. On the back, you get a 5 megapixel shooter on the Moto G and a flash right there, and an 8 megapixel camera on the Nexus 4. Both devices don't have that great cameras because the quality on both is really just average or just even below average after some people's views. So basically, if you're out for a camera phone, get a different phone because the Moto G is not going to be able to keep up to your expectations. Neither is the Nexus 4, but you've already known this for a while. Looking at the back, you can see that my Nexus 4 still has the cover foil that came with it on it because I don't want this full glass back to get scratched or break. That's why I left it on there, and it looks kind of, yeah, shabby right now. And that's another difference in the build quality or in the way both phones are built. The Nexus 4 is full glass. There's Gorilla Glass 2 on the front and even on the back. And on the Moto G, you just get a cheap plastic back that actually feels pretty nice. And yeah, but it is removable. You can actually put on different colored covers, which you can't do on the Nexus 4. And the battery is non-removable on both devices, although you could actually access it on the Moto G, but it's built-in fixed, so you won't be able to remove that. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. That was my small little dirty, quick and nerdy comparison of the LG Nexus 4 on the left and the new Moto G on the right. I was Roland with Mobile Geeks. See you later.